The chains bite first. Cold iron grinds against raw skin as Ava is dragged across the stone floor, each link clattering in the vaulted silence of the auction hall. Her wrists are bound in front of her, her ankles hobbled by a second length of chain that forces her to shuffle instead of walk. The once cream dress hanging off her shoulders is little more than a torn, dirt-stained rag. She keeps her eyes on the floor anyway. Stone is easier to face than people. They shove her up onto the wooden block. The platform wobbles under her bare feet. An entire court has gathered in the old keep's great hall, lords with fur-lined cloaks, merchants with heavy coin belts, warriors in mail and leather, all crowded beneath banners that still smell of smoke from the last war. Rows of faces blur together in front of her, hard and hungry, measuring her like they're appraising a half-crippled horse. Next lot, the auction master bellows, voice booming off the stone arches. He fists a hand in Ava's hair and jerks her chin up, forcing her to look out at them. Torchlight paints his features in orange and shadow. Up close, she can smell wine and meat and the salt of old sweat. Female. 22. Reads and writes. His gaze flicks down her body with clinical disinterest. No obvious deformities. Obedient. Housebroken. Laughter rumbles through the hall. Someone near the front snorts. Another man casually spits onto the floorboards near her toes. Heat crawls up Ava's neck, but she doesn't pull away. She learned weeks ago that jerking from their hands only earns another backhand, another bruise. Being dignified doesn't save you. Being silent, small and forgettable sometimes does. Starting bid, 50 silver, the auction master calls. The hall goes quiet, but not with interest. It's the silence of people refusing to waste breath. Eyes slide off her, looking instead to the next slave pen near the wall, the strong-backed males with thick shoulders, the girls with curves and painted mouths. A few buyers glance her way, then away again, unimpressed. Too thin. Too tired. Too broken to be worth feeding. 40, the auction master tries, the first hint of strain slipping into his voice. No one moves. He huffs out a frustrated breath. 30 silver. She's trained as a healer, he adds, seizing on the one thing that ever made her valuable. Knows herbs, bone setting, birthing work. A wave of derisive noise rolls over the hall. Healer, a warrior near the steps scoffs. The chain links on his armor glint as he laughs. We've got claws and wolf blood. We heal fast enough on our own. Why pay for softness, another calls. She'll only slow you down when she faints. The sound swallows her. Ava stares at her own hands, at the angry red grooves where the shackles rub her skin, and forces her breathing to stay steady. Her wolf is a dim, curled thing deep inside her chest, too starved and sedated to do more than whimper. If she reaches for it now, she knows she'll find only exhausted static. She used to believe her gift mattered. Her elders had placed herbs into her palms, guiding her fingers, teaching her how to close wounds and coax fever away. That knowledge couldn't save them when the raiders came. It couldn't save her pack. It couldn't stop the cages, the collars, the slow march across foreign lands that ended here, on this block, in front of these strangers. 20 silver, a gravelly voice cuts through the murmurs. Ava's head lifts before she can stop herself. The man pushing through the first row is broad and thickly muscled, his face slashed by old scars. His teeth are the sickly yellow of a man who chews too much bitter leaf. His hands are knotted and heavy, the kind of hands that swing whips and throw punches for sport. He looks at Ava the way some men look at meat past its best, annoyed, but willing to take it if the price is low enough. 20 silver from Gareth, the auction master announces, relief flooding his features. Do I hear 25? Silence. Gareth's mouth twists into a smirk as if the hall has already conceded. 15, he says lazily. Look at her. Skin and bone. You'll be lucky if she lives out the winter. The auction master bristles. She's worth more than 15, Gareth repeats, impatience sharpening his tone. Or I walk to the next town and let your little market rot. A ripple of unease moves through the stewards clustered by the door. Ava can feel it in the way the auction master's fingers tighten on her arm. It's not her life he's worried about losing, it's the coin. She closes her eyes. Maybe this is the best she can hope for, hard work, rough hands, pain that at least has an end when her body gives out. Maybe if she stays quiet, if she works fast and doesn't make mistakes, he'll only hit her when she deserves it. 15 silver, the auction master starts, resentment thick in his throat, going once. The air changes. It happens so fast the hairs along Ava's arms stand on end. A pressure rolls through the hall, heavy and invisible, making the torch flames shudder. The hum of conversation strangled itself mid-sentence. Somewhere behind her, she hears the distinct rasp of steel being sheathed, as if even unsheathed swords know better than to be naked in this presence. Her wolf stirs. It's faint, like feeling a heartbeat through layers of cloth, but it's there, ears pricking, muzzle lifting, catching a scent that hits every nerve at once. Power. Old, wild, threaded with iron and frost and the copper tang of command. Around her, bodies instinctively shift, shoulders bow, heads dip, knees bend. My king, someone whispers. The Alpha King, another voice breathes, hoarse with fear. Cain of the North. The weight in the room thickens until Ava's lungs fight for each breath. Authority slams down on the hall like a slammed gate. Every instinct she has screams the same warning: do not look. Do not draw attention. Submit. The heavy doors at the far end groan open. Footsteps ring against the stone, slow, unhurried, each one echoing like a hammer on a forge. She doesn't need to see him to know exactly where he is, his presence drags the air with it, a tide of silent deference. Men who would have gladly bought her life for a handful of coins now bow their heads, kneel, bare their throats. Ava's fingers curl around the chain at her wrists. She tells herself to keep her gaze on the floor, to be nothing more than another piece of shadow at the edge of his path. Kings don't notice scraps like her. Kings step over them. Who dares sell an omega for 15 silver? The voice is deep and roughened, cutting clean through the hush. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The auction master startles so hard his grip on Ava's arm slips. Why, Your Majesty? We were told to move the remaining stock quickly. Of course, if she does not meet your standards, we can. Lift her head, the king says. The order slides over Ava's skin like cold steel. A hand forces her chin up again. Torchlight glints off dark plates of armor and the mesh of chainmail, off a broad chest marked by battle and a scarred jaw set in stone. The man in front of her wears a wolf's pelt as a cloak, the silver fur spilling over one massive shoulder. His eyes, gold, impossible gold, study her face, taking in the bruises, the hollow cheeks, the faint tremor in her hands. His gaze drops to the iron at her wrists, the chain at her waist, the brand just visible against her collarbone. This one, he says quietly, more to himself than the hall. She's a healer? Ava's throat is dust. Somehow, a word still scratches its way out. Yes, my king. The hall holds its breath. Gareth starts to protest. I've already 100 gold, the Alpha King announces, eyes never leaving Ava's. The room explodes. Gasps, curses, the shocked scrape of benches. Someone drops a cup, it shatters on the stones. Even the auction master staggers, his ruddy face going ashen. Ava can only stare. A moment ago, she was worth less than a sack of grain. Now every gaze in the hall burns into her like she's made of solid coin. She doesn't understand why the king would do this, why his stare feels less like ownership and more like recognition of something she's tried desperately to bury. The chain at her waist tugs as the stewards scramble to obey, shouting for a chest of gold, stumbling over each other in their haste. Somewhere beyond the open doors, wolves howl in the distant mountains, their voices threading through the stone like a promise. As the Alpha King turns and gives the order to bring her to his fortress in the north, Ava's knees nearly buckle. Because the last time she heard that howl, the last time she smelled his scent on the wind, her whole world burned. And as the guards lead her off the block and the gold changes hands, memories of that night surge up like smoke, dragging her back to the moment everything was torn away. Back then, before the auction, before the chains, before the Alpha King bought the Omega, no one wanted. Before we begin, tap subscribe so you never miss the next story. The chains were the first thing anyone saw. They hung from Ava's wrists in a heavy loop, iron links clacking as the guards dragged her across the stone floor of the old keep's great hall. Every step scraped raw skin. Every jolt sent a dull throb up her arms. She fixed her gaze on the flagstones anyway. Looking at stone was safer than looking at people. Up, one of the guards snapped. They shoved her onto the wooden platform that had been bolted over the hall's central steps. From up here she could see the crowd more clearly, merchants in worn leather, minor nobles in fur-trimmed cloaks, warriors in dark mail with swords resting across their knees. Banners from half a dozen conquered packs hung along the walls, their colors dulled by smoke. Ava stood barefoot on the rough planks, shoulders bowed, hair hanging in tangled ropes around her face. A hush moved through the hall, not of respect, but of appraisal. The kind people gave livestock. Next lot, the auction master called. He was a thick man with a thinning crown and red cheeks, his voice trained to carry over battle and weather alike. He caught Ava's chin in one meaty hand and jerked her head up, turning her left, then right, to give the buyers a better view. Female, he announced. 22 years. Literate. Trained for housework. His thumb dug into the bruise blooming along her jaw as he angled her face toward the warriors in the front row. All limbs intact, he added with a forced chuckle. Bit on the skinny side, but feed her properly and she'll hold together. The laughter that followed was low and coarse. Someone spat near her toes. Another man muttered something about stringy meat. Heat crept up Ava's neck, smeared with grime as it was. She didn't jerk away from the auction master's hand. She didn't try to twist out of his grip. The last time she'd done that, back in the border town, it had earned her a broken rib. You survive by making yourself forgettable, old Mother Hessa had told her once. Wolves remember the prey that runs. Starting bid, the auction master boomed, 50 silver. The silence that followed stretched. Eyes slid off her, seeking stronger shoulders and brighter eyes elsewhere. A pair of merchants standing together glanced at Ava, then at one another, mouths turning down in matching frowns. A tall woman in good armor didn't even bother to look, more interested in the male slave pen behind Ava, the one with thick arms and a proud, unbroken stare. The auction master cleared his throat. 40 silver, he tried. Nothing. 30, then. 30 silver. Trained hands, this one. His grip shifted from her chin to her arm, fingers digging into old bruises as he hauled her forward a step. Nose herbs. Bone setting. Birthing work. A healer, he added with a chiding glance at the crowd, as if they were fools for not leaping at the chance. This time the response was laughter. Healer, one warrior scoffed. Chainmail rattled as he folded his arms. We've got wolf blood. We heal fast enough. Can't stitch a throat that's been torn out, another called. Waste of coin, that. The sound washed over Ava like cold water. Her fingers curled reflexively against the manacle bar. The iron bit deeper. Once, those words, her training, her calling, would have lit a spark of pride in her chest. She'd spent years learning to grind roots for fever, to press her power into broken bones until they knit. Her touch had soothed pups and eased elder wolves into their final sleep. It had meant something. It had not mattered when the raiders came. The memory rose, unbidden, the smell of smoke and wet fur, the shriek of metal, the elders shouting for the pups to run. The silver arrow hiss. The way her power had stuttered uselessly when she'd pressed glowing hands to her brother's chest and felt nothing. She tore her thoughts away and focused on the auction block, on the here and now. On survival. 20 silver, a voice rumbled from the crowd. The sound of it made her stomach drop. Ava's head lifted before she could stop herself. The man stepping forward had shoulders like a butcher and a face full of old scars. His teeth were stained a sickly yellow, his thick hands looked accustomed to swinging clubs, not tools. A heavy leather belt strained around his middle, weighted with keys and hooks. His eyes slid over Ava with the slow hunger of a man selecting an animal he planned to work hard and break harder. Gareth, one of the warriors near him, muttered under his breath, and even that short name carried a touch of unease. 20 silver from Gareth, the auction master repeated, relief flooding his tone. Do I hear 25? The crowd quieted. Ava stared at the scuffed planks beneath her feet, fighting the urge to be sick. It could be worse, she told herself. A mine, perhaps, would be worse. Being sold in pieces for some sorcerer's parts would be worse. Hard work and hard hands and bruises, she could live with those. For a while. 15, Gareth said. The auction master blinked. What? 15 silver. Gareth spat on the floor and folded his arms. Look at her. She's half dead already. I'll have to feed her for months before she's any use. A ripple of irritation passed through the hall. The auction master's fingers tightened on Ava's arm. She's worth more than 15, Gareth repeated, voice sharpening. Or I take my coin elsewhere. Plenty of other markets. Plenty of other stock. That landed. Ava could feel it in the way the buyers shifted, in the way the stewards along the walls tensed. This wasn't about her, it was about keeping the large man's money flowing through their stalls instead of some competitors. She closed her eyes and took a breath that tasted of dust and iron. Maybe this was the path left to her. Survive Gareth's yard until her body broke. Survive long enough that the pups in his household were grown and savage enough not to need beating every time they forgot their place. Survive for no other reason than stubbornness. 15 silver, the auction master said grudgingly. Going once. The air changed. It was subtle at first, a prickle along the back of Ava's neck, the way a room feels just before a storm breaks. Torch flames guttered. Conversation choked itself off mid-word. Somewhere behind the press of bodies, a sword slid softly back into its sheath as if even steel knew better than to stand exposed. Her wolf stirred. It had been a dull, sleeping thing for weeks, sedated by drought and chains and too many nights without shifting. Now it lifted its head inside her chest and sniffed the air, ears prickling, eyes narrowing. Power, it whispered. Alpha. A hush swept outward from the hall's entrance like a physical force. Men who'd sneered at her for being too weak now bowed their heads. A few dropped to one knee. Others simply lowered their eyes, throats bared instinctively. My king, someone breathed. The Alpha King, another voice whispered, hoarse with awe. Cain of the North. The name fell like a stone into a well. Authority pressed down on the hall, heavy and absolute. Ava drew her shoulders in, shrinking against the auction master's grip. Every instinct screamed the same command, do not look. Don't draw his attention. Kings didn't see girls like her. Kings saw maps and borders and armies, not broken omegas with shackles on their wrists. The great doors at the back of the hall groaned open. Boot steps rang on the stone, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Each step carried its own circle of silence with it. Ava kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her heart climbing higher with every measured pace. Your Majesty, the auction master stammered. The man's hand, so steady when he'd hauled her around like a sack, suddenly trembled on her arm. We weren't expecting. Who is selling an omega for 15 silver? The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the stillness with the clean edge of a blade. Ava felt it in her bones. Low, roughened, with a weight that made her muscles want to drop her to her knees. She swallowed hard. And no one of importance, my king, the auction master babbled. Merely, clearing out the last of the captives. She's weak. A poor investment for most. If she offends you, we can. Lift her head, the king said. The hand on her chin jerked harder this time, forcing her face up so abruptly her vision swam. Torchlight blurred and sharpened again into a figure standing just a few paces away from the platform. He wore dark plate and chainmail, the kind crafted to move with a fighter rather than weigh him down. The metal was scarred, battered by claws and blades, but meticulously cleaned. A wolf pelt draped across his shoulders, black as midnight, the fur rippling faintly when he moved. His hair was dark and sweat-tousled, his jaw shadowed with stubble. A thin, jagged scar ran from the corner of his mouth to the edge of his beard. But it was his eyes that pinned her. They were gold. Not metaphorically, not some trick of firelight. Gold, like molten metal, bright and cold at once. They moved over her face, ignoring the dirt and bruises, the hollowed cheeks and cracked lips, as if cataloging something only he could see. He looked at the shackles. At the ring of iron around her waist. At the brand burned faintly into the skin just above the neckline of her torn dress, proof of ownership issued by some faceless governor in a town she never wanted to see again. The auction master says you're a healer, Cain said. The fact that he spoke to her directly froze her tongue. Ava swallowed, forcing the word out past a throat gone dry. "Yes, my king." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "And your wolf?" "Bound," she admitted. "The chains, the drafts they made us drink. But she's there." His gaze didn't waver. Somewhere off to the side, Gareth puffed himself up. "Your Majesty," the big man said, almost jovial, "I already made an offer." The auction master agreed. "Wouldn't be proper to." 100 gold, Cain said. The hall erupted. Gasps and curses crashed into one another. Someone dropped a clay cup. It shattered on the stone with a sharp crack that sounded almost like a bone breaking. A few voices protested, but they were swallowed by the rising roar of disbelief. The auction master swayed as if he might faint. "Oh, 100, my king." "A problem?" Cain asked mildly. No, of course not." The man tripped over himself bowing, shouting for stewards, for witnesses, for a chest to be brought at once. Gareth's face went a dangerous red. "You can't just." Cain turned his head slightly, just enough to let his gaze brush the man. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Gareth's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. He sank back into the crowd like a stone into deep water. Ava stood very still, heart pounding against her ribs hard enough to hurt. 100 gold. No one, not even the prettiest of the captured girls, had fetched half that. She felt the weight of every stare in the hall all at once, hot and heavy, as if they were trying to see what she had done to earn such a price. She hadn't done anything. She was just standing here, shackled and thin and trembling. "That's the trick, isn't it?" A brittle voice in her mind whispered. "Kings don't need reasons." Cain stepped closer to the platform. "Name," he said. "Ava," she answered. He considered that for a heartbeat, then nodded once, decision settling over his features like armor. "General Rowan," he called without looking away from her. A tall man with dark hair pulled into a knot and a scar over one eye stepped forward from the ring of warriors at the edge of the hall. He wore lighter armor than his king, built for speed rather than brute force, but the way men automatically made space around him said enough. "Majesty?" "See to the payment and the writ," Cain said. "She travels with my party." Rowan's gaze flicked to Ava, lingering just long enough for her to see his frown. "You're taking her north yourself?" Cain's jaw tightened slightly, but his tone didn't change. "I am." Rowan dipped his head. "As you command." The chains at Ava's ankles were unclasped first, then the iron ring at her waist. When they hesitated at the shackles around her wrists, Cain gave them a look. "She's not going to fight," he said. "Are you?" he added, directing the last part at Ava. She swallowed and shook her head. "No, my king." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he heard the note of truth beneath the fear. A moment later, the last lock snapped open. For the first time in months, cool air touched the skin of her forearms. The absence of weight made her feel oddly off balance, like she might float away. A cloak appeared around her shoulders, coarse wool, bearing the faint scent of leather and pine. She stiffened, then realized one of the younger soldiers had stepped forward to drape it over her. He ducked his head as soon as she met his gaze, as if embarrassed to be caught showing kindness. "North at first light," Cain said. "Make ready." He turned without waiting for a response, cloak sweeping behind him as he strode toward the doors, the crowd parting in his wake. His warriors fell in around him, a tide of steel and fur. Rowan paused just long enough to jerk his chin at Ava. "Move," he said quietly, before someone decides to argue with the king's decision. She stepped down from the platform on unsteady legs, the cloak trailing at her heels, and followed. They gave her a corner in the stables that night, between two empty stalls. She curled under the cloak on a bed of old straw, too tired to feel shame about the fleas. Outside, the keep's narrow yard rattled with the sound of men preparing for travel, buckles snapping, hoofs striking stone, low voices trading orders. Ava lay awake and listened to it all, staring at the warped beams overhead. 100 gold. She turned the phrase over and over, as if trying to find a hidden crack in it. He could have taken her for free, just by saying the word. He could have walked past and let Gareth have her. The king had no need to spend coin on a ruined Omega. So why had he? Memory slipped in through the cracks of her exhaustion, soft as smoke. Her Pax Valley, green and steep. The little brook behind the healer's hut, where Hessa had made her grind willow bark until her fingers ached. The smell of crushed leaves and damp earth. The sound of pups squabbling. Her brother's laugh. Then the night sky splitting open with fire. Men in armor that gleamed like ice storming through the ravine, wolf forms tearing in their shadow. Banners snapping in the wind, black and red, the silhouette of a wolf's head crowned in silver. The stories had always spoken of the Alpha King of the North as a distant storm, something that happened to other packs when they crossed his borders. She had never expected to see his soldiers riding through her own home, hands slick with the blood of wolves she'd grown up with. They'd called him conqueror. They'd cursed his name as they fell. Was he there that night? Had he watched from some high ridge while her world burned? Or had she been sold along the chain of spoils so many times that the original sin was half a continent away by now? Her mind chased the questions until they blurred. Eventually, exhaustion dragged her under. The journey north began at dawn. They chained her again, lighter irons this time, connecting her wrists with a loop that allowed just enough movement not to trip. She was placed near the rear of the king's company between two mounted warriors. Cain rode at the front, flanked by Rowan and a handful of others whose expressions never relaxed. The road climbed steadily into the mountains. The air grew thinner, colder. Pine trees closed in on either side of the trail, their needles whispering secrets overhead. Loose stones slid under Ava's bare feet, cutting into skin still tender from the last march. She pulled the borrowed cloak tighter around her and kept walking. By midday, her legs burned. By evening, they shook. She heard the men talking in snatches. Waste of gold, if you ask me. King's business isn't ours to question. An Omega, though? Thought he'd sooner put one down than bring her to the fortress. Ava kept her eyes on the path. The chains between her wrists clinked softly with every step. On the second day, rain rolled in, thin, cold sheets that soaked her dress and turned the trail slick. She slipped twice, skin scraping on rock. The third time, her knee twisted badly, sending a sharp bolt of pain up her thigh. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, forcing herself back upright. By the third day, the pain in her legs had become a dull, constant throb. The world narrowed to the next step, and the next. Her vision blurred at the edges. Once, she stumbled so hard that the cloak slid from her shoulders, catching beneath a soldier's horse. "Watch it," the rider snapped, jerking the reins. "Stupid." "Enough," another voice said. A shadow fell over her. Ava blinked up through strands of wet hair. Cain had reined his horse to a stop beside her place in the line. Rain darkened his cloak and beaded on the edges of his armor, but he looked as steady as if they were standing in a dry hall. His eyes moved from her muddied feet to the way she leaned unconsciously toward the mountain wall. "She's going to drop," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "I can keep walking," Ava managed. The words came out rough. Her lips felt numb. "I'm not. I won't slow you." Cain studied her a moment longer. Then he swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion. "Majesty," Rowan protested, drawing his horse up short. "There's no need, we can lash her to. She won't survive being dragged." Cain stepped closer, ignoring the rain and the mud. "And I paid 100 gold for her. I don't intend to watch that investment die on the road." Ava flinched instinctively as he reached for her, expecting rough hands. Instead, his grip was firm but careful as he slid one arm behind her shoulders and another under her knees. With unsettling ease, he lifted her off the ground. She gasped, fingers tightening around the chain between her wrists. "I can walk," she repeated weakly. "I know," he said. "You did." He carried her back toward the front of the line. The warriors watched, some openly, some from the corners of their eyes. A few faces were openly shocked, others shuddered quickly, tucking their reactions behind masks of disciplined indifference. An alpha king did not carry slaves. An alpha king did not carry anyone. Rowan rode beside them, jaw tense. Just behind him, another rider with hair gone silver at the temples and eyes like chipped ice watched in silence. Ava hadn't noticed him before. His presence felt different from the others, sharper, colder. When his gaze slid over her, she felt the same chill she'd known on the auction block under Gareth's eyes, only older, more calculating. "Uncle," Cain said without turning. "You disapprove." The older man's mouth twitched. "I question, Majesty. There's a difference. Our enemies already whisper that you grow soft. Because I refuse to slaughter villages for sport?" Cain asked. "Because you choose to carry an omega in chains up the mountain like some prize?" The man's gaze flicked to Ava, then back to his nephew. "Pain makes wolves strong. We both know this. That was the lesson my brother died to teach you. And yet," Cain said quietly, "here we are. Alive. On the mountain. With an omega healer the other kings will kill their own sons to have." The uncle, for who else could this man be but Craven, the beta of the fortress, the one the rumors whispered about, gave a mirthless smile. "We shall see what she heals, Cain. Flesh or resolve." He put his heels to his horse and rode ahead, cloak snapping in the wind like a shadow. Cain's jaw tightened. For a moment, his grip around Ava shifted, and she felt the barely leashed tension in him, the strength coiled under armor. "Don't listen to him," she said before she could think better of it. His eyes dropped to her face, surprise flickering there. "He's my uncle. I've been listening to him my entire life." "That doesn't mean he's right," Ava murmured. A corner of his mouth twitched, as if he wasn't sure whether to be amused or annoyed. "Rest, Ava. The climb only gets worse from here." She wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, but her body betrayed her. As he shifted her weight more securely and climbed back into the saddle with her cradled against his chest, exhaustion washed over her like a tide. The last thing she registered before sleep dragged her under was the steady beat of his heart under her ear and the rumble of his low command to the company. Forward. The fortress waited at the top of the world. Gray stone walls rose from the mountainside itself, growing out of the rock like teeth. Watchtowers stabbed at the low clouds. Narrow windows glowed with torchlight. Beyond the main gate, Ava glimpsed a wide courtyard, a training yard, smoke curling from open forges. They passed under the portcullis to the steady rhythm of boots and hooves on stone. Guards bowed their heads as Cain rode through, but their eyes slid to the girl in his arms and stayed there, dark with confusion. He set her on her feet only when they reached the center of the yard. Her legs nearly gave out, and she had to grab his forearm to stay upright. The muscle under the leather bracer was hard as the stone beneath them. "Steady," he said. A whistle cut across the courtyard. Ava looked up. Men and women in armor moved through a brutal training regimen on the far side of the space. Pairs sparred with blunted blades, their strikes fast and brutal. Two wolves in full animal form lunged at each other under the sharp eye of a drill captain. Blood slicked the stones in places, but no one slowed. When someone fell, they pushed themselves back up or were kicked aside. One young warrior, no more than 16, by Ava's guess, missed a parry. His opponent's practice sword slammed into his wrist. There was an audible crack. The boy's cry cut through the clang of weapons as he dropped to his knees, clutching his arm. "Up," the drill captain barked. "You think the enemy pauses because your bones break?" The boy tried. His face went gray. He managed to get his feet under him before collapsing again. The captain snarled and stalked forward, grabbing the injured limb. Ava saw at once the way it bent wrong. The captain twisted. Pain ripped a hoarse scream from the boy's throat. The captain sneered. "You walk it off. Or you die." Ava's nails dug into her palms. Her power flared faintly in response to the boy's agony, a pull in her chest that was part instinct, part training. Her feet shifted before she could stop them. "Don't," Cain said quietly at her side. She looked up at him. "He needs." "This is how they were taught," he said. "How I was taught. Pain strengthens. The weak fall behind. Or they break," she said before she could swallow the words. His gaze hardened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he gestured to one of the stewards hovering near the steps. "See the Omega fed," he ordered. "Clothed. She stays in the eastern wing." The steward, a thin man with worried eyes, bobbed his head. "Yes, Majesty." Cain turned away then, cloak swirling, already moving toward a knot of waiting officers. The fortress seemed to close around Ava as she watched him go, stone and steel and tradition pressing in. The steward cleared his throat softly. "This way, girl." They gave her a small chamber in the servants' wing, just wide enough for a narrow bed and a rough-hewn chest. The window was an arrow slit overlooking the inner courtyard. Cold seeped through the stone, but there was a wool blanket folded at the foot of the mattress, and a basin of clean water waiting. It felt like luxury. Ava washed, scrubbing weeks of dirt from her skin until it burned. The sight of herself in the dented bit of polished metal mounted over the basin made her pause. Hollow cheeks. Dark smudges under her eyes. A faint circle of bruising where the iron ring had pressed around her waist. She looked like a ghost who wasn't sure whether it had permission to stay. There was a soft knock. A young woman with a tray of food stood in the doorway, bread, stew, a wedge of cheese, more than Ava had seen on a single plate in months. The girl's brown hair escaped her braid in wisps, and there was a burned scar along her wrist, pale and shiny. "The king said you're to be fed properly," the servant said, eyes darting over Ava's face. "I'm Mira." "Ava." Her hands trembled as she took the tray. "Thank you." Mira hesitated, then stepped further into the room and closed the door behind her. "They said you're a healer," she whispered. "Is it true?" Ava's gaze dropped to the girl's scar. "I was," she said. "Once." Myra's fingers unconsciously rubbed the puckered skin. "We don't have healers here." "Not really. Just the quartermaster and his herbs to keep fevers from spreading. The rest of it is," she swallowed. "We're told to endure. To be grateful." Anger prickled under Ava's skin at the resignation in her voice. "Sit," she said gently. Mira blinked. "I shouldn't. I'm meant to be in the kitchens." "Just for a moment." Ava set the tray on the chest and reached for Myra's arm. "Please." The girl perched on the edge of the bed, clearly torn between duty and curiosity. Ava took her hand. The old burn was mostly healed, but there were deeper, angry red patches near the edge, places where the scar tissue pulled painfully. "This will sting," Ava warned. She closed her eyes and reached inward. Her wolf answered, sluggish but present. Ava drew up a thin thread of power, sending it spilling through her fingers into Myra's skin. Warmth spread under her palm, the old pain loosening. The raw patches cooled, then smoothed. Mira sucked in a breath. "What are you?" "Shoo," Ava murmured. A moment later, it was done. She pulled back, suddenly lightheaded. Healing on such an empty well was like dipping into a nearly dry river, possible, but dangerous if she did too much too fast. Mira stared at her wrist. The angry red marks had faded to pale pink. Her fingers flexed, and she gasped again. "It doesn't pull," she whispered. "I thought it would always. How did you?" "Don't tell anyone," Ava said, voice firm. "Not yet. Do you understand?" Mira looked up, eyes wide. "They say healing is weakness," she said. "That it makes wolves soft." "Maybe they're wrong," Ava replied. Myra's answering smile was quick and fierce. "I won't say a word," she promised, then slipped out the door, clutching her mended wrist as if it were a secret jewel. Ava sank onto the bed once she was gone, chest heaving. Tired as she was, there was a small, stubborn spark of something bright in her chest. "You're not just a thing on a block," she told herself. "Not just a girl in chains. You're still what they trained you to be. A healer." Word spread quietly. A stable hand with a badly twisted ankle limped a little less after crossing paths with the new Omega in the corridor. A scullery boy with an infected cut found it mended after he returned a dropped bucket to her. Nobody spoke of it loudly, whispers traveled through the fortress like smoke all the same. Cain heard them. He stood at the edge of the training yard one evening, watching his warriors drive each other into the dirt. Craven stood beside him, arms folded, eyes hard. "You've been busy," the beta said. Cain didn't look away from the combat below. "We've just returned from a 3-week campaign. There's work to be done." "Not that." Craven's lip curled faintly. "You're healer." Cain's fingers tightened on the railing. "What about her?" "The servants are talking." The Omega is mending burns and sprains in the shadows. Craven's voice dripped disdain. You bring weakness into our halls and act surprised when it breeds. Cain's jaw clenched. He remembered the boy in the yard, the snapped bone being twisted like a lesson. He remembered Ava flinching at the sound. She keeps my people on their feet, he said finally. Alive men hold the line better than dead ones. Soft men break, Craven countered. You coddle them, and they will fail you when it matters. We're not discussing this now. Oh, but we are, Craven said softly. You are king, yes. But I am the one who raised you. Who put a sword in your hand when you could barely lift it? Who taught you that mercy is a blade that cuts the one who offers it? I won't see you throw that away because some frightened Omega puts glow in her palms and makes you remember your mother's stories. Cain's head snapped around. For a heartbeat, the yard, the clanging steel, the shouts of the sparring warriors, all of it faded beneath the sudden, pulsing silence between them. Careful, uncle, he said, voice low. Craven's smile did not reach his eyes. Always, Majesty. He walked away, cloak whispering over the stone. Cain stayed, watching the yard until the sun dipped low. His gaze kept drifting toward the eastern wing, where he knew the servants' quarters lay. Where he knew Ava slept. He'd seen the way her hands shook after she'd healed a soldier's infected wound in the infirmary, how she'd hidden it by grabbing for the bandages faster. He'd seen the boy's face when the fever broke, the way life had returned to his eyes. Maybe Craven was right. Maybe this would make them soft. He wasn't sure he cared. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. The sky was a hard, clear blue. Breath smoked in the air as warriors trained in the courtyard, their yells and the clash of steel echoing off the high walls. Ava watched from the edge of the space, standing half in the shadow of a pillar. She'd been sent to deliver clean bandages to the quartermaster, but he'd waved her off with a grunt and taken them himself, more interested in watching the sparring. Her gaze snagged on one of the younger trainees, the same boy whose wrist had been broken on her first day here. The bone had mended crooked. He favored that arm now, compensating with the other, his movements unbalanced. He lunged at his opponent and slipped on a patch of frost. The world seemed to slow. His feet skidded. His body twisted. He went down hard, his leg catching under him at a sick angle. The crack of bone snapping cut across the yard like thunder. He screamed. Everything in Ava seized. Power surged through her veins so fast it made her dizzy. She stepped forward without thinking. Craven was there first. He strode across the yard with the unhurried ease of a man attending something mildly interesting, not a boy howling on the ground. Warriors pulled back to make room, their faces watchful. The beta crouched beside the fallen youth and set a hand on the ruined limb. On your feet, he said. I can't, the boy gasped. Craven's fingers tightened. He twisted. The boy's scream went ragged. Ava flinched as if struck. Her nails bit into her palms. Pain makes you stronger, Craven said conversationally, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. Pain teaches. Next time, you won't be so clumsy. The boy tried to push himself up and collapsed again. Craven scoffed and stood, letting the mangled leg drop. Someone drag him off before he bleeds on the training ground, he ordered. If he can stand by sunset, he keeps his rank. If not, he joins the scullery. Ava moved. She didn't decide to. Her body simply went. One moment she was in the shade of the pillar, heart racing. The next she was striding across the open yard, the eyes of dozens of warriors snapping toward her. "Stop," she said, the word tearing itself from her throat. Craven turned slowly, disbelief sharpening into fury as he took in the sight of the Omega girl in a plain dress and borrowed boots, shoulders set, eyes bright with anger. "This is not your place," he said. "That boy will never stand again if you leave his leg like that," Ava shot back. Murmurs rippled through the watching warriors. No one spoke to Craven like that. No one. "Ava." Kane's voice carried from the far side of the yard, warning and command twined together. She heard him. She couldn't obey. She dropped to her knees beside the boy. His face was slick with sweat and tears, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Bone pushed against the skin of his thigh at an angle that made her stomach lurch. "Look at me," she said. His gaze, unfocused with pain, wobbled toward her. "See, can't," he sobbed. "Hurts." "I know." She took his hand, squeezing hard enough to anchor him. "I know. But I can fix it if you let me." "You will do no such thing," Craven snapped, stepping toward her. "Stand up, Omega, before I drag you away myself." Ava met his eyes, heart pounding. "You say pain makes them stronger. Then let him prove it." Her voice shook, but she pressed on. "Let him endure the healing." Silence dropped over the yard like a weight. Craven's lips peeled back from his teeth. Kane appeared at the edge of the circle. He didn't stride this time. He moved like a stalking predator, quiet and inexorable. Gold eyes flicked from Ava to Craven to the boy on the ground. "This is madness," Craven said to him. "Call her off." Kane looked at Ava. "Can you help him?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "If no one stops me." He held her gaze for a long, measuring moment. Then he turned to the gathered warriors. "You all want to see how an Omega healer works?" he asked, voice carrying easily. "Watch. If she fails, you'll have your proof that mercy is useless." Craven's eyes flashed. "Kane. Stand down, uncle." The two words were soft. They hit like a hammer. For the first time, Ava saw Craven check himself, not out of respect, but because he recognized that pressing further would mean something worse than losing an argument in the yard. His jaw clenched. He stepped back. Ava didn't waste the opening. She placed her hands gently on either side of the shattered bone, ignoring the boy's strangled whimper. "Listen to me," she told him quietly. "This will hurt." He gave a wet laugh. "More than it does now?" "Yes," she said honestly. "For a moment. Then less. Then nothing. Do you trust me?" He was young, but he'd grown up in this fortress. Trusting strangers wasn't in his blood. And yet, looking up into her face, he nodded. "Good," she whispered. She closed her eyes and reached inward. Her wolf surged to meet her, stronger than before, stirred by the adrenaline thrumming through her veins. Power flooded her hands, a soft, pale glow blooming under her fingers where they touched the boy's ruined leg. Gasps rippled around them. Ava gritted her teeth. She guided the bone back into alignment, feel and instinct working together. The boy screamed once, twice, a sound that raked over her nerves. She didn't flinch. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her own breath came harsh. Almost there, she muttered. The glow pulsed, then steadied. The jagged edges of bone knit under her palms, smoothing as if time itself had been dragged forward. Torn flesh sealed. The swelling receded. When she finally sat back on her heels, the world tilted. She blinked until it steadied, then let out a slow breath. The boy lay panting, eyes wide and disbelieving. Carefully, Ava tapped his calf. "Try to move your toes," she said. He did. They flexed. A hush fell over the courtyard, deeper than before. "Stand, if you can," Cain said quietly. Fear flared in the boy's eyes. Ava squeezed his hand. "I've got you," she murmured. He swallowed, then pushed himself upright. His leg held. His weight shifted fully onto it. He wobbled, then straightened, shoulders squaring. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Warriors who had flinched at his scream now stared as if seeing a ghost. Cain's mouth tightened, something like satisfaction flickering there. Craven's face was carved stone. "She acted correctly," Cain said, his voice carrying to every corner of the yard. "We do not throw away our young because they stumble. A warrior who survives his mistake and learns from it is more valuable than 10 who never risk enough to fall." He turned to Ava. For a heartbeat, pride warmed his gaze. "You will continue to heal those who need it," he said. "Under my protection." Craven took a step forward, fury burning cold in his pale eyes. "You make a mockery of our traditions. You spit on the blood that built these walls." Cain's shoulders rolled back. "I build something new," he said. "If that shames you, uncle, you are free to leave my fortress." The yard held its breath. Craven's jaw worked, but he did not speak the words that roiled behind his teeth. Slowly, he inclined his head, a bow that felt more like a threat. "As you wish, my king." He turned on his heel and stalked away, the warriors parting for him. Only once he was gone did the yard exhale. The boy Ava had healed looked at her with open awe. Others followed his lead, eyes filled with something she had not seen in a long time directed her way. Hope. Ava swayed. Cain was beside her in an instant, hand closing around her elbow to keep her upright. "Easy," he said. "How much did that take from you?" "Enough," she admitted, trying for humor and mostly managing breathlessness. "I'll be all right." He studied her face, the pallor of her skin, the thin line of her mouth. His hand lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary before he stepped back. "You've just changed this fortress," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "No," she replied, glancing after the direction Craven had gone. A chill slid down her spine. "I've just painted a target on my back." Cain's mouth tightened. He followed her gaze, golden eyes narrowing. On the far side of the courtyard, in the shadow of the archway, Craven stood watching them, his expression hidden in dim light. But even from this distance, Ava could feel it, the focused, simmering hate of a wolf whose grip on his world had just been loosened. The Omega no one wanted and the Alpha King who'd bought her stood together in the center of the yard, the weight of a kingdom's old cruelty shifting under their feet. Somewhere deep beneath the stone, the foundations of the fortress began to crack. Craven's gaze burned between Ava's shoulder blades long after he'd vanished into the archway. The boy she'd healed limped only in memory now, running drills with the others, but the yard hadn't relaxed. It felt as if the whole fortress was holding its breath. That night, a knock sounded on her door. Not the quick, nervous tap of a servant. A single, measured rap. Ava. Kane's voice. She opened the door to find him filling the narrow corridor, cloak unfastened, hair damp from a recent wash. Without his crown and armor he looked younger, and more dangerous, somehow, like a sword without a sheath. "Walk with me," he said. He led her up a spiral stair she hadn't climbed before, to a heavy door banded in iron. Inside, a broad chamber opened, lit by a scattering of candles. Maps crowded one wall, a rack of weapons lined another. A single window looked over the courtyard, its glass thick and old. His scent saturated the room, pine, steel, something wilder beneath. She hovered near the threshold. "You wanted to see me, my king?" He flinched almost imperceptibly at the title. "Kane," he said. "When it's just us." Her heart gave a foolish lurch. "Kane, then." He paced once, twice, as if fighting himself. "What you did today in the yard," he exhaled, hands flexing. "You saved that boy's future." "You sound as if that angers you," she said quietly. "It angers him." He nodded toward the window, toward the fortress beyond. "Craven thinks you're unraveling everything he built here. Everything he taught me." "Do you agree?" she asked. Gold eyes met hers. "I remember being that boy," he said. "Bones broken for mistakes. Expected to heal or be left behind." His jaw hardened. "You gave him another path." "I can't condemn that." Relief loosened something in her chest. "But," he added, and the words sliced between them, "Craven will not let this stand. He believes pain is the only truth. He will come for you, Ava." "I've survived worse," she said, but it sounded thin even to her. Kane stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back. There was something raw in his gaze now, the edges of the alpha's mask fraying. "Stay away from my uncle," he said. "If he speaks to you, walk away. If he sends for you, refuse. Do you understand?" There was fear in his voice. Not for himself. "Yes," she whispered. "I understand." His shoulders eased a fraction. For a heartbeat, he lifted a hand as if to touch her cheek. At the last second, he fisted it instead and stepped back. "I ride at dawn," he said. "Raiders on the western pass. While I'm gone, be careful." "I'll keep my head down," she promised. Kane's mouth tipped into a humorless half-smile. "You've never kept your head down a day in your life," he said softly. He walked her back to the door, then stopped her with a word. "Ava." She looked up. "I paid 100 gold," he said. "Not to watch you die." Her throat tightened. "Then come back," she said. "So you can keep being annoyed by me." A real smile flickered then, brief and bright. "That," he murmured, "I can try." He left before she could say anything else. Kane rode at sunrise with half the fortress at his back. The courtyard felt hollow without him, like a chest missing its heartbeat. Craven watched the company disappear through the gates from the highest wall, eyes narrowed to slits. With the king gone, the fortress loosened around the edges. Not in discipline, the drills still rang, blades still met, but in the spaces between. Mira came to Ava first, cradling a burn from the ovens. Then a stable hand with a shoulder wrenched out of place. A laundry girl with cracked, bleeding knuckles. They came at dusk, at dawn, between chores. Ava healed them all in the quiet corners, storerooms, stairwells, shadowed alcoves. Word spread like warm water through winter-cold stone. A warrior showed up one evening, helmet in his hands, embarrassment turning his ears red. "Twisted my knee in drills," he muttered. "Can't keep up with the others. If Craven sees." "Sit," Ava said. When he left, walking without a limp, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Laughter began creeping back into the halls. Children chased one another through the inner yard, their games no longer ending in bruises that never mended right. The training master still barked, but he no longer had a line of half-crippled recruits dragging behind. Craven saw it all. He watched from balconies and archways, from the head of the dining table, from the shadows of the chapel where old banners hung. Each softened blow, each quiet kindness, each whisper of "Ava helped" carved deeper lines into his face. "This is rot," she heard him say one night, voice carrying through a half-open door. "It starts in the flesh and reaches the bones. By the time you smell it, half the meat is gone." She didn't see who he was speaking to. She felt the promise of it, though. The horns blew at midnight 3 weeks later. Ava jolted awake, heart pounding. Shouts echoed in the courtyard below. She pressed to the narrow window just in time to see the gates burst open and Cain ride through, armor shattered and streaked with blood. His cloak hung in ragged strips, his eyes were wild, glowing bright even from this height. "Where is the healer?" he roared. The fortress snapped into motion. By the time Ava reached the yard, soldiers were dropping from saddles, some carried on makeshift stretchers. The stink of blood and silver filled the air. Cain strode toward her, every line of him coiled tight. "With me," he said, seizing her wrist. There was no room for argument. "It's Craven." Her step faltered. "Your uncle?" "Ambushed," he snapped. "Arrowheads dipped in silver. It's in his blood. My healers can't pull it out." Silver in the blood, Ava's stomach lurched. "If it reaches his heart, he dies." Cain's grip tightened. "Or you stop it." They ran through the fortress and out the back gate, down a steep, hidden path into the forest. The moon hung swollen and bright above the trees, painting the world in blue and silver. Ava's lungs burned. The scent of blood and pack fear grew stronger. "You'll never reach him in time on 2 legs, Cain said roughly. "Shift." She stared at him. "The drafts, the chains. They're gone," he growled. "You broke half their hold when you healed that boy. Break the rest." He stripped off his cloak, his form shuddering. Bones popped, twisted, reshaped. Fur burst from skin. In the space of a heartbeat, the Alpha King stood on 4 powerful legs where a man had been, black fur rippling, eyes blazing molten gold. Her wolf surged at the sight, slamming against her ribs. Ava closed her eyes and let go. It hurt, gods, it hurt, but it was a cleansing pain, like a bone finally setting right. Her body folded, stretched, shrank. The world snapped into sharper focus, scents layered thick, sounds crisp as glass. She shook out her pale fur, chains gone, and threw back her head in a howl that answered the Alpha's. They ran. Wind tore through her coat. The forest blurred past, moonlight streaking between branches. The ground sang under her paws. For the first time since her pack fell, Ava felt whole. They burst into a small clearing where torches ringed a makeshift camp. Craven lay on a pallet, armor half-stripped, lips blue-white. Black veins spidered from a wound near his collarbone, crawling toward his heart. "Keep everyone back," Cain snarled, already shifting, already kneeling at his uncle's side. Ava padded forward, then shifted too, stumbling naked to her knees. Someone, I think Rowan, threw a cloak around her shoulders. She barely felt it. The silver stench rising from the wound made her eyes water. The poison laughed in her power, slippery and cruel. "I can't promise," she began. "Do it anyway," Cain said, voice raw. She set her hands over Craven's chest. His eyes snapped open, wild with hatred even at the edge of death. "Touch me and I'll tear your throat out," he rasped. "You're welcome to try," she said through her teeth, and pushed her power into him. It was like thrusting her hands into ice. The poison clawed at her, racing up her arms, trying to eat the light. She chased it, burning it away thread by thread. It fought for every inch. Craven convulsed, a hoarse sound ripping from his lungs. "Hold him," Cain ordered. Hands pinned the beta's shoulders. Ava dug deeper. Her vision dimmed at the edges. The last knot of silver clung stubbornly to the muscle of his heart. She gripped it, tore it free, and flung it out of him. It hit the dirt as a glittering, smoking lump before dissolving into nothing. Ava sagged, catching herself on shaking arms. Craven sucked in a rattling breath. Color flooded his face, an ugly, living red. He stared at the sky, then at her. "You should have let me die," he hissed. She rocked back, stunned. "Uncle," Cain snapped. "She saved your life." "She ruined it," Craven spat. "This," he jerked his chin toward his healed chest, "is the rot I warned you of. You bring weakness into your bloodline, Cain. Into our fortress. It will kill us all." A murmur rippled through the men gathered around them. Ava felt each word like a blade. Cain rose slowly. "Careful," he said again, softly. Craven laughed, the sound ragged. "You threaten me? After I raised you? After I built everything you sit on?" "You taught me to kill to protect what is mine," Cain replied. "Remember that when you speak of her." Their eyes locked, old love and older fury crackling between them. Ava saw, with a sudden cold clarity, that something fundamental had snapped, and could not be mended. Treason doesn't start with daggers, she thought. It starts with words. Days later, when Craven sent for her, she went. The message was simple: "The king requests you. Come to the lower halls." It came from a guard she recognized, a man who'd once brought her a bandage for a cut on his hand. His gaze wouldn't quite meet hers now. Her skin prickled. Cain's warning echoed in her mind. But if he needed her? The stair down to the dungeon swallowed light. Torches burned low, throwing long, shivering shadows across the damp stone. The air smelled of rust, old straw, and something sourer beneath. The guard opened a door and gestured. "Inside, my lady." She stepped through. The door slammed behind her. Ava spun. For guards ringed the small chamber, swords drawn. Their faces were stone. Behind them, in the center of the room, stood Craven. He looked whole, powerful, his armor polished, his hair pulled back in a warrior's tail. Only his eyes betrayed the fever still burning in him. "I told you to stay away from him," Cain had said. "You lied," Ava whispered. Craven's smile was all teeth. The king may have given you leave to play at healing, Omega, he said. But this fortress is still mine. He crossed the space in 3 long strides and seized her by the throat, slamming her back against the cold wall. Her feet left the ground. Her fingers clawed uselessly at his wrist. You die tonight, he murmured, breath hot against her face. And when they find your body, they'll say the raiders slipped past the walls. They'll say the king failed to protect even his prized little healer. The pack will turn on him. He'll have nothing. Just like the village he burned to take you. Black dots crowded her vision. She forced sound through a crushed windpipe. He didn't burn, my. The door exploded inward. Cain filled the frame, eyes blazing feral gold, cloak snapping like a banner. Behind him came Rowan and a knot of loyal guards, blades already bared. Let her go. The words were more growl than speech. Craven laughed, tightening his grip. Too late, boy. You let this disease spread. I'm only cutting it out. Cain moved. The room shattered into motion, steel against steel, snarls, the wet sound of blades finding flesh. Rowan crashed into one of Craven's men. Another lunged at Cain, only to be backhanded into the wall. Craven dragged Ava with him as he spun, using her as a shield. She felt the point of something press against her ribs, cold, humming with the sickly thrum of silver. Stand down, Craven hissed, or I spill her blood all over your pretty dungeon and see how much you like your healer then. Cain bared his teeth. You think I won't tear you apart? You won't, Craven said, triumph flashing. You still care. That's your weakness. Ava felt the weapon shift. She did the only thing she could. She kicked off the wall and twisted, throwing her weight sideways. Craven's grip loosened just enough. She dropped, the silver blade slicing across her shoulder instead of her heart. Cain lunged. Uncle and nephew collided in a flurry of claws and steel. Cain's shift tore through him halfway, his features warping, hands lengthening into taloned, furred things. Craven moved with vicious speed, parrying, slashing, making no effort to avoid his king's flesh. A flash of silver. Craven drove a dagger up under Cain's ribs. The sound Cain made wasn't a roar, it was a choked, ugly exhale. He staggered, eyes going wide, hand flying to the wound. Silver burned along his veins, dark lightning branching under his skin. No, Ava crawled toward him, palms slick with her own blood. No, no, no. Cain's answering strike was pure instinct. He caught Craven's throat in one clawed hand and drove the other straight through the beta's chest. Bone cracked. Flesh tore. His claws punched out Craven's back in a spray of blood. They froze like that, uncle and nephew, bound in a final, terrible embrace. Craven's eyes flickered in shock, then fury, then something almost like pride. Good, he managed around the blood bubbling on his lips. You, finally, learned. Cain's hand spasmed. Craven sagged, dead weight on his arm, before sliding free to collapse in a crimson heap on the stones. The dagger hilt jutted from Cain's side like an accusation. He swayed, then dropped to his knees. Ava reached him as he fell. Cain, she choked. Stay with me. Look at me. His eyes found hers, already dimming. The gold was clouded now, silver veins sneaking toward his heart. Should have listened, he rasped. His hand groped blindly, catching her wrist. Knew he'd try. Stop talking, she said, tears spilling hot. Save your breath. Ava. Her name scraped out of him like a final order. Don't let him win. Then he slumped, breath stuttering. The room blurred. Rowan shouted something. The remaining guards backed toward the walls, faces white, their loyalty crumbling in the wake of what they'd just seen. Ava laid both hands over the dagger wound. Her power roared up like a storm. Silver fought her instantly, vicious and intimate, racing to meet her light. It slid along her bones, whispered in her ears, offered her oblivion if she would just let go. She gritted her teeth and shoved back. Not you, she snarled. You can't have him. The poison burned. Hours, or seconds, time shattered, dragged past. Her vision tunneled until there was only the wound, the searing heat of Silver, the stubborn thud of Kane's heart faltering under her palms. She poured everything into him. Memories tore free as she worked, her brother's laugh, the elders' songs, the feeling of running at her alpha's side under a moonlit sky. Her pack. Her valley. Every scrap of love she'd ever known flowed through her hands, fuel for the light. The silver screamed as she ripped it out by the roots. When it finally broke, when the last knot of poison dissolved under her touch, Ava collapsed against Kane's chest, too weak to catch herself. His heartbeat, faint but steady, thumped against her cheek. He's breathing, Rowan said somewhere above them, half in disbelief. Ava tried to answer. The world went black. She woke to sunlight. Soft linen brushed her skin. The weight of blankets pinned her gently to a mattress. For a wild, disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her pack's healer hut. Then the sense hit her, fortress stone, pine smoke, and the sharp, unmistakable threat of Kane. She turned her head. He lay in the bed beside hers, stripped to the waist, the place where the dagger had entered a faint pale line now. His eyes were open, watching her. You're terrible at following orders, he said hoarsely. Emotion slammed into her so hard she almost sobbed. You died. Briefly. His mouth curved. You dragged me back. Again. She tried to sit up. Her body protested. He was there instantly, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. When I woke, he said quietly, Craven was dead, our guards were shaken, and you were a ghost on the floor. I thought. His voice broke. He swallowed, jaw flexing, then forced himself on. I realized something in that moment, he said. All the battles I've fought, all the wars, all the territory, none of it frightened me half as much as the sight of you not breathing. Her heart stuttered. Kane. He stood, every movement slow, as if relearning his body without the poison. Then he held out a hand. Come, he said. There's something I need to do before I lose my nerve. He helped her dress, a fresh cream gown, soft and simple, and led her through the fortress. It was different. Children played in a garden that hadn't existed weeks before, soil turned where there had been only packed dirt. Green shoots already reached for the sun. Warriors trained nearby, their strikes no less sharp, but when one stumbled, another offered a hand instead of a kick. Heads bowed as they passed, not in fear, but in something quieter. Gratitude. Respect. They stepped into the main courtyard under a rising moon. The entire pack stood gathered in a ring, warriors, servants, elders, children. Torches flickered. The air thrummed with expectation. "What is this?" Ava whispered. "My choosing," Cain said. "Our choosing." He drew her to the center of the circle. "You were brought here as nothing," he said, voice carrying, not with the force of command but with something deeper. "A slave in chains no one wanted. My uncle called your gift rot. Our enemies laughed when they heard I'd traded 100 gold for a starving Omega." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cain took her hand. His thumb brushed over the faint scars on her wrists, reverent. "But you healed our deadliest enemy," he went on. "You healed me. You healed this fortress. You taught us that strength without mercy is only another kind of weakness." His gaze burned into hers. "You changed everything, Ava." He raised her hand to his mouth and pressed his teeth lightly against the skin of her wrist, where a mate's mark would sit. The touch sent a shiver through her entire body, her wolf rising in answer. "In front of this pack, under the moon that judges us all," he said, "I claim you as my equal, my healer, my mate." A gasp went around the circle. Ava's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "An Omega." "An Omega who faced down my beta," he interrupted gently. "Who defied me when I was wrong. Who dragged me back from death twice. There is no rank for what you are." He bared his wrist and offered it to her. Her wolf surged, dizzy with joy. Ava stepped closer, close enough to see the ring of faint scars at his throat, the new tired lines at the corners of his eyes. "You bought me," she murmured, remembering the auction block, the way his voice had cut through the hall. "No one else would. No one else saw anything worth paying for." "I was wrong," he said. Her breath hitched. "You were never mine to buy," Cain finished. "But if you'll have me, I am yours to keep." The world held its breath. Ava bowed her head over his wrist and let her teeth break skin, just enough to draw blood. His scent flared, rich and wild. He did the same at hers, marking her with a bite that burned and soothed all at once, sealing the bond with power and promise. Howls erupted around them, wolves lifting their voices to the swollen moon. Light seemed to pour through the mate mark, racing along her veins, intertwining with his. For a moment she felt everything, his fierce protectiveness, his lingering grief for Craven, his stubborn hope, all wrapped around a single, blazing truth. He loved her. She opened herself in return, her scars, her fears, her stubborn, ridiculous heart, and felt him welcome every piece. Cain framed her face in his hands, forehead resting against hers. "My queen," he whispered, just for her. Ava looked past his shoulder at the fortress, the gardens, the training yard, the children, the banners snapping overhead. Stone that had once been soaked in cruelty now thrummed with something new. Life. The Omega girl no one had wanted stood in the center of it all, the Alpha King's mark burning warm on her skin, his hand steady in hers. "I think," she said, voice trembling with laughter and something bigger, "we're going to make them very uncomfortable." Cain's answering grin was all teeth and pride. "Good," he said. "Let the world learn what happens when they underestimate an Omega." The pack howled again, louder, their voices rising toward the moon. And in the courtyard of a fortress once ruled by pain, a healer and a king began the work of remaking a kingdom. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next story.